Israel's war in Gaza started with the horrific October 7 terror attack last year. Over 20,000 people have died since then. Now this Israel-Hamas war has already triggered off a wider conflict. There's a second conflict zone in the Red Sea with the Houthis blocking the Bab El Mandeb in support of Hamas. Will the conflict spread beyond these two conflicts? Now joining me to discuss this today is Lieutenant General Hooda, former Northern Army commander, Pramit Pal Chaudhary, and my colleague Kartikeya Sharma. Gentlemen, welcome to the News9 Plus Show.
Thanks, Sandeep. Thank you very much.
General Hooda, I want to start by asking you, it looks like the new year has brought no respite for West Asia. It's in the last 48 hours, we've been seeing new conflict theaters open up, bombings in Iraq, in Iran, in drone strikes in Lebanon, and the Houthis don't seem to be, relenting on allowing shipping to go through. How could this conflict expand into, into further sub-regional conflicts?
So, Sandeep, as you already pointed out, the fact is that it's already spread to some extent. We've talked about the terrorist attack in Iran, the drone strike that took place in Lebanon, the Houthis who are affecting the commercial shipping in the Red Sea. So, frankly, it's having a global impact, particularly the fact that very large number of shipping companies have said they're going to reroute their shipping. Beyond that, if you see, you've also had a drone strike in the Arabian Sea,
Yes.
300 kilometers away from the coast, which has drawn into a very large extent the Indian Navy, because they've now sailed out additional task force, destroyers, maritime recce, etc., and going in. You have a very large number of nations, France, US, who are there in the Red Sea and trying to protect this commercial shipping. And I think the larger sort of geopolitical impact, we were seeing some sort of normalization of ties between Israel and the Arab nations.
Yes.
And where does that go now?
Right.
There is a feeling also in Israel that, look, the real culprit behind this is Iran.
Right.
And so Iran is something that needs to be tackled in some ways. So if you ask me, I think, this conflict is not going to go away. In fact, you're going to see a widening of this conflict, having actually global geopolitical impacts.
Right. Widening of the conflict. And Pramit, the Abraham Accords are like the framework of the Arab-Israeli peace deal in recent years. If the conflict spreads, do you think they could actually consume the Abraham Accords and that framework agreement itself comes crashing down? Or, as General Hooda says, that if there is an understanding that Iran is the mastermind, then there would be greater impetus to push that the remaining parts of the Abraham peace Accords through. Give us your thoughts on this.
Well, see, the larger idea behind the Abraham Accords is not just the normalization of the Gulf, or the Sunni monarchy's normalization of their relationship with Israel. It was also about eventually trying to develop a regional architecture that would guarantee the security and prosperity of the Gulf and to some degree the Levant. So the idea overall was to eventually bring Iran into that picture.
Right.
We saw Saudi Arabia, for example, begin an outreach to Iran even before it had announced the IMEC, which was effectively a supplement to the ITU2. So what could happen, though, is if Iran positions itself as the enemy of the Abraham Accords, if you wish, or becomes so difficult to work with that the Abraham Accords metamorphoses into something else, which is in effect a de facto alliance between the Gulf monarchies and Israel. The Saudis have basically pushed very hard that they want the Americans to be part of any such agreement. They basically told the Americans, we are prepared to do many things, but we need a security guarantee from you regarding Iran, which the Americans, especially under the Biden administration, which sees its overall foreign policy goal to be to withdraw from the Middle East, has been very reluctant to do so far. So the Abraham Accords can survive, or it can be changed if Iran positions itself or becomes to be seen as completely inimical to the idea of the normalization of relations between Israel and the Gulf.
Right, and Kartikeya, this thing of Iran being the, the absolute, unpredictable factor in West Asia, and the fact that we were talking about how Qasem Soleimani, literally the man who rebuilt the Iranian empire of influence, waging all those covert wars that you mentioned. How much of a factor is Iran really in this whole equation?
I look at it from two ways. People used to think that it was a self-contained theater. In 2018, I traveled from Aleppo via Palmyra, Homs to Damascus, and I had
this is when ISIS was
and I had lost my way around Deir ez-Zor. So they had this. The Syrians had this practice of stopping cavalcade every 5 to 10 kilometers, relaying it back as a practice that did this car pass the checkpost.
Right.
So they would confirm it, and then you would go forward. And maximum number of times I was stopped by Shia militants, probably of Chechen origin, Iranians, with the flags of Qasem Soleimani on it and Hezbollah. So first thing, the point which I want to bring, the proxies were already there.
They were there.
So we see them hyper-activated. It's a war of proxies.
Yes.
And secondly, I feel that what has happened is that the multiple theaters have become active this time. You have Houthis who have become active. They have been at the receiving end from the Saudi government. The people forget that the prowess of the Houthi missile is something being understood by the world now. Where it was the Aramco which was being hit 2 years ago by the Houthi drones.
Absolutely.
But that did not receive that sort of a reportage. So I think the sense of a limited conflict, or the idea of a conflict being limited, that has been broken. It impacts the world. That is why it is being received differently, Sandeep, and that's why it is seen differently. And my understanding is that if the proxies are allowed to function like this, escalation might happen. And I think that escalation, world cannot afford to have the two theaters as two active theaters and one dormant waiting to be active, which is the Taiwan Strait.
Exactly. And General Hooda, this thing that Kartikeya mentioned, the fact of very interesting aspect of this conflict, who would have thought that you would have proxy actors armed with anti-ship ballistic missiles, who would be targeting destroyers in a place as vital as the Red Sea? And what are the prospects of this conflict widening again to, God forbid, turn into an attack on Iran, or Iran strikes back and, enters this thing, and you could be looking at a third conflict zone in West Asia alone?
So Sandeep, as has already been brought out, the Houthis already had a sort of very well-developed capability and capacity to hit, targets at long ranges. So the Aramco attack was one such incident. So that ability and capability was there. I think what we need to look at of whether this conflict is going to widen further or not is, what is Israel's end state? And I'm not sure we know what their end state is, what is their thinking. After the kind of setback that they had in October after the horrific terrorist attack. I mean, are they determined to completely wipe out the Hamas? Are they looking at other sort of threats that could emerge from the Hezbollah, for example? And I talked about Iran. There are some, and I've interacted with some think tanks in Israel, which think that ultimately, if we need this problem to be sorted out, Iran has to be sort of tackled in some way. As I said, are they going to extend the conflict into Hezbollah after they've done what they have to do with Gaza? So what their end state is not very clear. It just seems that they are now sort of determined to, look at this problem and wipe out this whole issue of terrorism and the threat that it poses to Israel. And if that is their sort of larger game plan, then you could well see new conflict zones emerging.
Pramit, what is the end state? What is Israel's end state in this conflict? Is it the end of Hamas, or is it some perpetual global war on terror that they're going to embark on, killing all groups opposed to Israel?
Well, that's probably impossible, the second part, because Hezbollah, which is about 10 times the size of Hamas and deeply entrenched in the Shuf Mountains, would be almost impossible for them to handle. The issue without a war that would literally last years on end, include and incorporate missile attacks from Iran, for example.
Right.
No, I think the real issue for Israel is that when I've talked to Israeli officials, they're pretty clear on this, that they are dependent on a supply line, military supply line that runs to the United States. And America will effectively go into hibernation in February from the rest of the world as its presidential elections begin in earnest. So both Ukraine, Israel, and every other country that's dependent on American military supply lines is looking at February and saying, that's my end. That's when I don't know when America can provide me any more weapons.
Right.
Because the US Congress will no longer vote for such sanctions. The Biden administration will be focused on the election. So given that time frame, when we're already into January now, you are basically looking at all that Israel can hope to do is try to eradicate the Hamas leadership that exists in the Gaza Strip, potentially assassinate a few others around the world, which they've begun doing. And that's about it. After that, the real problem for Israel will be that Netanyahu then has to face the music at home, with his own people,
domestic
and it's likely that he would fall from office at this point.
Right.
So for Israel, you're now looking at the Gaza war, in effect, is now limited to X. Now, what is interesting is the attack in Kerman in Iran, over 100 dead, or roughly 100 dead. Who did this? Now, Iranians have immediately pointed the finger at Israel and said, this is a Zionist attack. America's intervened already and publicly said, our intelligence is pretty clear that it was not the Israelis.
Right. Very unusual of them to say that. I mean, it's normally, the Americans don't sit up and own up for terror attacks by third countries. It wasn't.
So no, and I think in this Americans are very nervous that Iran will go in under the assumption this is Israel, and launch the third front against Israel, then the really important one, which is Hezbollah.
Right.
For the Iranians, Hamas and the Houthis are effectively are useful, but they're not core to Iran's Shia militia strategy. But Hezbollah is their fighting arm in the Arab world. Right. And a Hezbollah war with Israel would be a genuinely enormous event, much larger than anything, and it would bring in everybody into the picture. Right. And that's clearly what America's trying to preempt, telling the Iranians, don't prejudge this. Right. And some of the indications are this may be the Islamic State or Al-Qaeda trying to play a mischievous role. Right. In other words, I'm the Islamic State.
Yes.
What would I love to see is that, the war is coming to an end in February. Can I make this a bigger war?
Yes.
This will be the perfect thing to do. I carry out a terror attack in Iran, leave the pointers, everybody will assume it's Israel.
Right.
And I trigger the broader war that I would love to have.
Absolutely. And Karthikeya, this sounds like a Game of Thrones series here, number of actors, conflicting interests, and, all pursuing that Iron Throne. But what's the end state, as General Hooda and Pramit were talking about?
I would say that, if you recall, till 1978, things were very different. In 1979, you had the Iranian Revolution.
No, that 79 is
79 was an Iranian Revolution
after the Second World War.
But then one more thing happened which people don't recall. You had 400 mercenaries taking over the control of Mecca.
Mecca, of course.
And then the French Special Forces commandos, they were converted and they were, deployed inside the Holy Precinct. That changed the character of the state and put it against the Iran.
Right.
I think broadly, unless and until a part of this rivalry is resolved, the repercussions will be continued to be felt by each country. America is a presence, but the bigger rivalry is between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And with dismantling of the state of Iraq, Iraq, Syria are subsidiary states to Iran. It's like one belt which covers. If you look at this post, if Iran, Iraq, Syria and Afghanistan.
No, it's an entire Shia superstate. We've spoken about it.
It's an open corridor from Herat till I would say Damascus. It's an open corridor.
So you can drive from Lebanon to the borders of Pakistan without crossing a single Sunni state.
Anyone who has gone to Lebanon would understand that Hezbollah is not something which is living in some remote camps in Lebanon. No, they are part of the state. They're elected there.
Yeah.
They are seen visibly there.
Right.
You know, it's just that
they're a state within a state.
They're a state within a state, and they're very well protected.
Absolutely.
I've seen it from my own eyes, and I've seen these chaps traveling from Lebanon to Damascus because it's so easy. But it's like a cavalcade of 40, and I've seen it from my own eyes.
Right. Absolutely. And this actually explains the kind of tinderbox that we are sitting on, that West Asia is sitting on, and as my co-panelists were just discussing, the possibility that this tinderbox could just literally catch fire and the conflict could spread beyond the active combat zones.
Plus, the Russians have the habits of sending their own militants to fight their own wars in other countries.
Right, absolutely. And you know, this is a story that's we thought we had seen the end of last year, but clearly not the case in 2024. Fresh headaches for West Asia and indeed for us, because we are linked thanks to the trade routes. But I'd like to thank General Hooda and my co-panelist Pramit Pal Chaudhary and Kartikeya for your insights into this West Asia tinderbox, a story that's going to be dominating the headlines all of 2024. Thank you for watching.
News 9 Plus. Download now.